about you tomorrow. Someone had a question about office hours. So today it's officially till 12:30, and I think I have a meeting soon after that. But I'll be in my office whole day till 5. So anytime you come, then see me free. You're welcome to. It's fine. Monday, most of the day I'll be in my office, and the same rule applies. But certainly I'll set aside Monday afternoon and help answer your questions about the topic. Okay. And I'll have the QA also be available on Monday. So I'll announce the specifics in an email later today. Any questions or concerns about the exam before we begin? Apart from the fact that we have it, that's a concern for all of us.
You said that it's going to be definitely doable in an hour and a half.
Yes. Doable, for an average student.
There's going to be 4 questions.
So I haven't actually designed the exam yet, but yeah, there'll probably be 3 or 4 questions. Certainly not more than 4, but it may be fewer than 4. Could be 3. So we can do the following. We'll give you a very easy exam. All of you can do well. You can all go home happy. Because we won't know whether you've learned anything successfully or whether I've taught anything successfully. So I think it'd be, I won't say it'd be difficult, but I wouldn't say that it'd be a giveaway, because then it doesn't serve the purpose. So you should view the exam more as a diagnostic to how you're doing, how comfortable you are with the material, as opposed to testing your intelligence or something like that. Exams don't do that. So it's more as a guideline for how well we're all doing. That's the way I look at it. Certainly there's no need for you to expect an exam that you cannot do, because it's not going to be that at all. And it's, I think it was, I don't know who said this, but the biggest fool can ask questions that the smartest person cannot answer. So the exam is not meant as a way for me to show off what I know, what we don't know. But if the roles are reversed, I'm sure you'll do much, much better than I can possibly hope to do. So don't worry about the exam. Just prepare well and do your best.
Do you have any recommendations on how we should prepare?
I think my recommendation would be that you review your lecture notes and homework notes and just read the textbook once. And if there's something that's completely unclear, then you should learn. You should be able to read the text and understand what's being talked about at some level. And the relevant sections are all updated, so you can be able to look at it. I think during the exam, I wouldn't plan on referring to my notes or the textbook very often. So I think it may be useful for you to prepare a cheat sheet or something so that you can look at it if necessary. But even though it's open book and open notes, I don't think it's going to. It's going to eat away some of your time if you don't learn the material well. But if you plan on looking up things, then you're expected to do something. And above all, use your common sense. So if you're asked to do something, suppose I give you a 2-variable linear program and I ask you to solve it, don't put it in standard form, do the simplex method, and so on. If you can look at it and solve it and justify your solution in some way, let's say you draw a graph and you see that this is a solution, and the question doesn't explicitly ask you to use the simplex method, then you should use whatever method you know. I wouldn't worry too much about computational errors because typically we don't penalize those. So just the usual stuff. So.
Well, we put them at 2-2 if we have them. I mean.
So, for instance, you may want to. So, one thing that I would put, for instance, would be the form of the dictionary in terms of the B matrix. So maybe because you're not used to seeing that or deriving that, it can just be handy to have that in place. Another thing that I would put in is, how to write down the dual of a linear program. I should make a note to myself that I shouldn't ask you these things. No, seriously. So, I mean, those are the kinds of things that you may want to have, right? So certainly you can definitely expect at least one question which involves a formulation of the programming problem, and at least one question that helps you on the methods, right? How to solve an LP. I mean, you may not actually solve an LP's completion, but there'll be a question designed to test whether you understand the methods, the mechanics of the simplex method. Anything else? Okay. So we meet here Tuesday at the exam is beginning at 9. So be here at 9, not 9:10. We go on till 10:30, and if necessary, 10:45. Okay. So like I said in the previous lecture. The rest of the course is about a bunch of topics, first of which is called network flows. So the way we are going to proceed is we've learned ways of solving linear programs, and this is going to be the foundation for the way we are going to solve other problems, for the most part. Now, there are certain topics where we rely on theory outside of linear programming, but for a good part, we make use of what we've learned, but we'll adapt it to the appropriate problem set. So from now on, the course is going to proceed very quickly because we assume that we've learned the theory behind LC as well. And so we cover the theory at a much faster pace. So the first topic is network flows. This is chapter 5 and 6 in your textbook. And we probably spend 3 or 4 lectures on this topic before moving on to integer programming. Network problems are special cases of linear programs, and so I'm going to quickly go over a little presentation that's based on the textbook so that it will be helpful for you to read the chapter as well. So first of all, it's a special case of linear programming, as we're going to see in a moment. Now, the advantage of network problems is that there's a visual representation of the problem, and somehow that makes it nicer to interpret algorithms to solve it, also to understand what the solution does. It's somehow much more intuitive than a general linear program. Okay? And as this slide here says, actually for network problems you can design more efficient algorithms as well. Okay? So even though it turns out that this is a special case of linear programming, so therefore you can use the simplex method. In fact, the simplex method, when used on networks, goes not surprisingly by the name of the network simplex method, and it actually is simpler than the regular simplex method. So there are ways of understanding or interpreting what a pivot is, how you go from what basis is, and things of the sort, in terms of visual structures that we study in a little bit. Now, network problems also have a property that there are other efficient algorithms available. So you don't have to rely on linear programming algorithms because you specialize problems and do things much more efficiently. And we study some of that as well. So here's a little example. This is taken from your textbook. So what you have here is a typical network flow problem. So let me explain some of its elements. So you have certain entities called nodes. So these are these numbered circular things, and these nodes are connected by what are called arcs. So you can think of these nodes, which are numbered 1 through 8 here, as cities, and the arcs as rows, if you will. So the nodes could be computers, and the arcs could be, they could be communication links between computers. The nodes could be people, and the arcs would represent some relationship between people. Let's say, he knows Pi very well, comfortable asking Pi for a favor or something. So you have all kinds of networks that come up in all kinds of applications, including the social sciences, but also in engineering. And so there are clear reasons for studying entities of this sort. Now there are some other things that are written down in this picture. So for instance, if you think of these nodes as being supply and demand points for a certain commodity, so let's say apples are produced in certain places, consumed in certain other places, and you'd like to ship them from where they are produced to where they are consumed. So this could represent the physical infrastructure that you have, a road network, for instance, and the numbers associated with these nodes. So on node 1, there's a number called 700, and that could be the supply. So node 1 has a supply of 700 of a certain commodity. Node 2 has a demand of 200. Okay, so that's what this negative number means. 3 also has a demand of 200. 4 has a demand of 300. 7 has a supply of 200, and so on. So the question is, can you design a way of shipping these quantities so that all the demand is met? So you have supplies at certain nodes, you have demand at certain other nodes. Is it possible for you to send these supplies to these demand points so that all of the demand is satisfied? So that would be one question that we might be interested in. So this is just a feasibility question. Is there a way, is there a shipping schedule that can satisfy all the demands? Okay? Is that clear to everyone? Now that may exist, sometimes it may not exist, and it's not always trivial to find whether it exists or not. Now here are some other constraints that may hold. So you may have limits on the amount of stuff that can be sent along an arc. So the arc has certain capacity. In a communication network, capacity might represent bandwidth. So you cannot send more than X amount of data per second along the link. Okay. So in this example, I think the lower bounds are 0 and the upper bounds are 200. So any arc can admit at most 200 units of flow. You could, in general, have lower bounds representing, these may be suppliers who have a deal with each other, and maybe the contract stipulates that you buy at least 100 units from this guy. Okay, so that would be a situation where there's a lower bound on arc flows. So one could introduce lower and upper bounds on the amount of flow that's permitted in an arc. Now you may also want to introduce costs, because sending stuff from 8 to 6 may be more expensive than sending stuff from 8 to 5. Okay. So once you introduce upper and lower bounds, the feasibility question still makes sense. Can you find a shipping schedule that satisfies all of these bounds? And if so, find one that's best possible if there's a cost. So you could think of a transportation problem where certain commodities originate someplace, where a commodity originates at certain points, needs to get to certain other points, and you'd like to find a way of transporting this commodity so that all the demand is met. And if there are many ways of doing it, you want the most efficient way, or you want a most efficient way. Okay. And efficiency is measured in terms of cost. And cost numbers here, so for instance, the numbers in parentheses here reflect the cost. So to ship 1 unit along the arc going from 8 to 5, you need to spend $4. Okay. That's what this number says. And we assume that the costs are linear. In general, you could have non-linear costs as well. So you could say that the cost of sending X units of commodity, X units along this arc is, some 4 times X squared, something. So this is a general network flow problem where the goal is to satisfy the demands of various nodes using the supplies at certain other nodes, such that all of the capacity constraints, both lower and upper bound on arcs are respected, and such that the overall cost of the schedule is minimized. Okay? Yes?
What are the numbers without parentheses?
The numbers without parentheses, these?
Yeah.
Let's not worry about it for a moment. Any other questions? So this is a general network flow problem. Lots of problems that we see commonly will be special cases. Okay? So we've already introduced all of this terminology, so we know what nodes and arcs are. And in this portion of the course, we'll always assume that arcs are directed. So roads are all one way. And if there's an undirected arc, we can replace it by a pair of directed arcs that are opposite each other. So whenever you see an arc that goes like this, you could say there's an arc from A to B and another arc from B to A. Now, graph theory is notorious for its terminology, especially for its inconsistency in terminology. So if you pick up different books, they call this by different names. So these are called nodes. They're also called vertices. They're also called points in certain books. These are arcs, edges. So some people use the term edge to indicate an undirected link, and arcs to indicate a directed link. Some people use arc to indicate an undirected link, and fortunately not edge to do the directed link, but directed arc. Okay? So there are, keep in mind that different books will define these terms in a different way. And this has been the way for, I don't know, the last 80 years or so, however long graph theory has been in existence. So don't be confused by terminology. I'll try to stick to nodes and arcs as much as possible. But don't have it very hard, so it will promise anything. So we already talked about arc flows, which are the amounts of stuff that traverse the arc. Those are called flows. Now, the word flow suggests that these quantities could be fractional, right? You could send half a gallon of oil across a pipeline, let's say. But in certain applications, you want these entities to be discrete as well, right? If you're transporting people. So we still use the word flow, but keep in mind that certain flows inherently have to be discrete, and certain flows are allowed to be continuous. The way we think about this problem in general, you allow for continuous flows. Okay? When flows have to be discrete, we mentioned that. We saw upper and lower bounds, which are capacity constraints on arcs. There's a cost associated with sending flow along an arc, which unless we specify otherwise, is always assumed to be linear. Okay? So there's a number, and if you send x units of flow along that arc, it's that number 3 times x. That's the overall cost to incur. Now, we also talked about external flows, which are supplies that come into certain nodes. If an external flow is negative, if it is positive, it's a supply, and if it is negative, it's a demand. We talked about what an optimal flow is. This is a flow that minimizes the overall cost. What we didn't talk about is gain, and that's a useful concept as well. And the idea is the following. In certain cases, when you send stuff across an edge, you lose a certain amount. Let's say you transmit power, there's inefficiency, and there are transmission losses, and therefore what you send is not what you get. Okay? When you convert, if these arcs represent a conversion from dollars to yen, for instance, you put in $100 here, and if this represents yen, you don't get $100. You get you don't get 100 yen, you get something else. So there are many applications where you want a multiplier on an arc. The multiplier represents some physical conversion or some actual loss that takes place in this transmission. So those are modeled by gain. Now, for now, think of these gains as numbers that are positive. Okay? But it could be bigger than 1, it could be smaller than 1. If the gain is 0.9, then it means if you send 1 unit at this node, if you send a unit at this node, and if the gain on this arc is 0.9, you really get only 0.9 units at this node. Okay? That's what it means. So 10% is loss. So these gains function as multipliers for the arc flows. Now, of course, once you have gains, one needs to interpret the capacity bounds more carefully, right? So what does it do if this arc has a capacity of 5, and if the gain is, let's say, 0.9, how many units can I send? Can I send 6, or can I send 5.5, because 5.5 times 0.9 is going to be below 5? The answer is typically no. The capacities represent, these are limits on what can be sent, not the actual flow. So think of these capacities on arcs as the amount of stuff that can leave arc A, that can leave node A. So that's how we always interpret capacities, and the gains will just increase or decrease the flow by a certain factor, depending on the problem context.
How is it going to differ from cost then?
Oh, the cost is something that you pay. It does not affect the actual flow. Okay. So if you look at a simple example where this node has a supply of 5, and this node has a demand of 4, and if the gain here is, the gain is 0.9, then if I send all 5 units, the amount of stuff that will reach here is 4.5. Okay? So because I need only 4, what I need to send out, so this is the flow along this arc, is 4 divided by 0.9. Okay, so that's what will be. Okay, so let me write it out here. So send 4 divided by 0.9 units from node A. Okay? So this is what you would do. So the cost that you would pay is 3 times 4 divided by 0.9, because C is the unit cost. Okay? Now, if this arc has a capacity constraint of 4, then this flow is going to be infeasible, because you're not allowed to send more than 4 units, and so on. Okay? So the gain is going to modify, is going to affect the flow directly. It's going to modify the amount of stuff that reaches a particular node. The cost is only what is based on what you pay, which is based on what you actually send. Any other questions? Okay. So here are, so this is a picture also in your book. So here are a bunch of special network flow problems. So the assignment problem, which is one of assigning people to jobs, let's say. Transportation problem, which is sort of what we just saw. There are shortest paths, so you have a network and you want to find the shortest path from a certain node to a certain other node. So what's the quickest way to fly from Boston to San Francisco, let's say, questions of this sort. There's a maximum flow problem which has to do with capacity. So I give you a network, and there's a point with an infinite supply, and there's a point with infinite demand. But the network has capacities, and I just want to know the maximum amount of stuff that I can send from here to here. So can I set, what is the maximum amount of flow that can travel from a certain node to a certain other node? That's called the maximum flow problem. So notice that in a maximum flow problem, you don't have any cost. It has to do only with capacity. We'll see more of that in a little bit. So all of these problems, it turns out, are special case of what's called a minimum cost flow problem. And the word pure is used in your textbook to indicate that that's a problem where all the gains are all one. So flow that gets sent is what is sent is what is received. Now, if you take that same problem and introduce gains, you get what's called a generalized minimum cost flow problem. So you take this problem, set all the gains equal to 1, you get this. You take this problem, the min cost flow problem, and specialize it in various ways, you get all of those other problems that I discussed there, the transportation, the assignments, and so on. And the generalized minimum cost flow problem itself is a linear programming problem. Okay? So any algorithm for linear programming, in particular the simplex method, will be able to solve all of these problems. Okay? So here's the transportation problem. So this is an example. So you have, n warehouses and destinations, and you have warehouses that have supplies, destinations have demand, and you want to ship goods from warehouses to the destinations, and you want to minimize the overall cost. So here, for instance, you have 2 supply points, 3 demand points, and you have this matrix. I don't know if everybody can see this. This matrix gives you the shipping cost. So we actually formulated a problem like this in our very first homework. So this is not particularly difficult. Now the interesting thing here is that if you look at the overall supply, you have 950 units of supply. But if you look at the demand, you only have 900. So there's 50 units, 50 extra units of supply. Now, we have that imbalance even in this little example where, if it's gained by 1, then you have 5 units of supply but only 4 units of demand. So you have excess supply. Now, people doing this somehow think that having a balanced network is good. So you introduce a dummy node that has no shipping costs associated with it. So this is something that just collects the excess supply. Now, If you have excess demand, then your problem is infeasible, because you'd like to find a way to satisfy all the demands, right? Anyway, so you have a supply of 950, a demand of 900. So this is a problem where the network is what's called bipartite, right? There are supply points and demand points. There are no transshipment points. It's nodes that are neither supply nor demand points. The distribution network example that I showed you didn't satisfy this property for a couple of reasons that we'll get to in a moment. Notice also that every supply point is connected to every demand point. But this we can relax by introducing a relatively large cost. So for instance, if it is too expensive to ship from San Francisco to New York, we could, we wouldn't use that at all. So if I make that instead of 2.5, I make it some large number, then that's a way of saying that don't use the arc. That's what is done here in the arc from LA to New York. There's a number M that says that shipping cost is just too high, so we don't want to use it. It's indicated as M. You can put some big enough number. Of course, what's big enough is for us to determine. Okay. Now notice that supply points are not connected and demand points are not connected. So we cannot ship stuff to New York and ship LA to Chicago and then from Chicago to New York. That's not allowed in this transportation model. Now in reality, of course, those things are possible. And in that case, this Chicago node is not just a demand node, it also acts as a node that forwards flow. Okay? And this is the difference between the transportation problem as it's formulated here and a general minimum cost flow problem, where you have nodes that can actually forward flow to other nodes. Okay? So basically, these are some little things that are worth noting. So this is already something that I said, the cost of M. The cost, if you introduce a dummy destination, you don't pay any shipping costs to send stuff there. But of course, that destination has only a demand of 50 in this case. And so you don't want to put more demand there, because then your regular demand points will not get there material. Now this last comment here is interesting, and we will probably not get to it in this course. The nice thing about problems of this sort is that if you start with integer data, as in the problem we did, you will always get an integer solution that's optimal. There is always an integer optimal solution. There could be fractional optimal solutions. So there's always at least one integer optimal solution. And if you use the simplex method, you will find such an integer optimal solution. So if in fact these represent discrete entities, and you have integer data to start with, you're assured of an integer solution. That's sort of nice. So not only are these special linear programs, they are special integer programs as well, and they are really special in both respects. So here's the linear programming formulation of the transportation problem. So Cij is the cost of shipping stuff from supply point I to destination J. Xij is the amount of flow from I to J. So you'd like to minimize the overall cost, subject to, and you see the two sets of constraints. You have what's called complete balance, right? Every demand point gets exactly its demand, and every supply point sends out exactly its supply. If you have imbalance in the problem, like we did in this little example, you will have to use less than equal to here. Okay? So the total amount of stuff that leaves node I is going to be at most Si. You could also say the amount of stuff that reaches node J is at least Cj. And that really is the constraint of this problem. But you can convert any transportation problem into another one in which there is balance by introducing dummy supply, dummy demand nodes. Anyway, so here's an LP formulation. So we can solve this linear program. As I said, we'll do much better, and we'll discuss methods a bit later, not in today's lecture. Okay. So I'm going to skip over the solution and look at a problem that's special case even of the transportation problem that we discussed, which is assigning entities. So you have graduate students have to be assigned to campus housing, let's say. So you may have certain, or you have people and jobs, and you want to match people to jobs. So this matrix here reflects the benefit or the cost associated with doing this assignment. So for instance, here you have 4 ships. They all need to carry one load each from a single port and 4 different ports. And these are the shipping costs. So you'd like to find an assignment that minimizes the overall cost. So which load is taken by which ship? This is the decision. Okay? So why is this a special case of the transportation problem? We could think of all the supplies as being 1 and all the demands as being 1. These as the shipping cost. Okay? And really what you want to find is a shipping schedule. Now the way I said it, it's not exactly this assignment problem, because you could have, so let me actually draw the network here. So here is S1, S2, S3, S4, and here is P1, P2, P3, P4. And the network I have in mind is the following. So these are all 1, right? So that's the supply associated with these nodes. And the demands here are all -1. Okay. And the arcs will have to be 1 to, let's say, 3. So this is going to be 6. Which is the entry on row 1 and column 3. So these are the shipping costs. So if you look at this transportation problem, you need to send 1 unit from this node, 1 unit from here, 1 unit from here, 1 unit from here, and each of these nodes will have to receive exactly 1 unit. But of course, you could send 1/3. You could send 1/3 along this arc, 1/6 along this arc, and 1/2 here, right? And that's a way for you to send this 1 unit to these destinations. And if you focus on a particular destination or a port here, it could get 1/2 from here and 1/2 from here. All of those things are allowed in the transportation sector. Okay? Is this clear? So if you view it as a transportation problem, all of these things are valid schedules. Okay? Now for the assignment problem, you don't want this. What you want is a single arc from from S1 to some T carrying 1 unit of flow. So does everyone understand the difference between these two things? So for an assignment problem, we want an integer solution to the transportation problem. But we know from that last bullet in a couple of slides ago that there is always, if you start with integer data, which we do here, there's always an integer optimal solution. Now, what can be an integer optimal solution in which all the supplies and demands are 1? The only integers have to be 0 and 1, right? No other integers are possible. So if all the flows are 0 and 1, and every node sends out a unit of flow, and every node receives a unit of flow here, then there has to be an arc carrying 1 unit of flow from some supply node to this demand node. So you look at any demand node, there must be exactly 1 arc carrying a flow of 1 into it. So maybe for P3, it is this arc. Let's do P2. Maybe for P2, it is this arc, carrying 1 unit of flow. Now, if S3 carries 1 unit of flow to P1, S3 cannot be involved in any other shipment because it only has a supply of 1. And P2 cannot be involved in any other, cannot receive flow from any other S node because it has a demand of only 1. So you will get an assignment. So even though the assignment problem as stated is not a transportation problem, the fact that you always have an integer solution to the transportation problem means that you could solve the assignment problem as a special case of the transportation problem. Okay. So here's basically all of that is explained here. So you have this network, you have supplies, and you have demand here, and these arcs represent, the numbers along the arcs represent the shipping costs. And these bullets tell you exactly what we just discussed, right? So you may ship a 1/4 unit along the 4 arcs leading supply node 1, but because you know that there's always a 0-1 solution, you're assured of getting an assignment. You could have assignments for all sorts of things. So, any questions about this? Yes.
What if we have time constraints? I mean, is that the shipping cost is extremely large in one place, say from LA to New York. What if there is a time constraint? They have to ship the item before a certain time of day.
Right. So that's a good question. So the question is, what if there are, we are only looking at cost, but maybe there are other features of the problem that are important. So the short answer is we are not modeling any of that. So surprisingly, so far in our discussion, time never played any role. We're just looking at flows, but we somehow didn't look at the time it takes for us to send stuff from A to B. And time is not going to play a role for a little while, but network flow models over time are important. They've been studied. I don't know if we get to it in this course. So right now, these are like steady state flows that we are thinking about, and time is not an issue yet. But of course, when you're talking about transportation in the real world, time is an issue. When you're talking about communication networks, time is an issue. You don't want to send packets along a path if it doesn't get to the destination within a certain guaranteed delay that you'd like to provide. But we probably come back to this issue towards the end of our discussion of network flows. Any other questions? Then there is the shortest path problem. So you have a network, and these arcs have distances, and the goal is to find the shortest path from the origin to the destination. So you could, in this example, interpret these distances as the time it takes to traverse the arc. And you want to get from the source to the destination in the shortest possible time. Now this would seem like modeling time, except that here we don't have any other. So, right? So we just dealing with a single parameter. You could call it distance, you could call it time, you could call it cost. But as long as you want to find a path such that this single entity, or whatever you're dealing with, is minimized, you have what's called a shortest path problem. So the distances might be length, time, cost, the values can be positive or negative, and you'd like to somehow find a way to go from I to J, these are two specified nodes, spending the least amount possible, or in the shortest time possible, etc. Okay? Now this is going to be a special case of this network flow problem. And again, we are going to make use of the integrality property, the fact that when you start with integer data, you always have integer solutions. So here's a little example. So you want to go from node 1 to node 6. Okay. Ignore the numbers associated with node 1 and node 6. But look at the numbers on the arcs represent the amount of time it takes to go along that edge. So if you want to go from node 1 to node 3, it'll take you 6 minutes, let's say. Now, how many paths are there from node 1 to node 6? The good answer is many. I mean, there aren't too many. We could make a list of all the things, right? But if you have a network with a few thousand nodes, then you can imagine that maybe there are many more ways of going from one node to another than you would care to enumerate. Right? So you want a better way of solving this problem than just listing all possible paths. Now, one way to think about this problem is to say that node 1 has a supply of 1, and node 6 has a demand of 1. Okay? And the other nodes all have no supplies, no demand. And think of these numbers on the arc as costs. And solve the minimum cost flow problem. Find a way of sending this unit flow from node 1 to node 6 at minimum cost. Okay? So the minimum cost flow problem becomes one of finding a way to send this one unit of flow from node 1 to node 6 in the most efficient way. Does everyone agree with that statement? Okay. Now, of course, there are no other nodes with supplies or demands. So if 6 receives a unit of flow, it has to be from 1. And if 1 sends a unit of flow, it has to be to 6. Okay. And as before, you could have flows along different paths. So you could send a half unit along the bottom path, a half unit along the top path. But notice that if you are interested in the shortest path, and if this is the most efficient way of shipping, all of the paths have to have the same length because there are no capacity constraints. So imagine that here is my node 1, here is node 6, and here's a path along which 1/2 units flow. Here's another path along which a third is sent, and here's a third path along which 6 is sent. And let's say this is optimal. Okay? Suppose this path has length L1, this path has length L2, and this path has length L3. Then the overall cost is just 1/2 L1 plus a third L2 plus a 6th L3. Now suppose L1 has lower cost than these two things. Then what prevents you from sending everything along L1? but there are no so the only thing that would prevent you is capacity, but there are no capacity constraints in the problem. Okay? You're allowed to send any amount you like. Therefore, L1, L2, and L3 all have to be shortest path. Therefore, you know the shortest path length. So that's one way to say that this would model the shortest path problem. So, in other words, even though when you look at this as a minimum cost flow problem, you could have fractional flows along multiple paths. All of those paths have to have the same length. So therefore, you can take any one and solve your shortest path problem. So that's one way to think about it. Another way to think about it is to appeal to this integrality property. That here's a problem with integer data, therefore there's an integer optimal solution. And the only integer optimal solution has to be a path from 1 to 6, because there's exactly 1 unit of flow in the system, and therefore all the flows have to be 0 or 1, so you just practice unit flow as it goes along the network and you will recover a path.
You place 1 unit of supply at node 1 and 1 unit of demand
At node 6, right.
and you eliminate all the demands of the other node.
There are no demands for the other nodes.
So by pushing this 1 unit from 1 to 6, you get several times.
You could. So if you get a solution where there are many paths, where this 1 unit is sent as, so maybe in that network, you send half a unit along the arc 1-3 and half a unit along the arc 1-2. Okay. That 1/2 unit gets to 6 somehow, and the other 1/2 gets to 6 in some other way. If you track these two flows, then the path that they take should both be of equal length, is what I am trying to argue. Because if they were of different length, you would not have an optimal solution. If that argument is a little unclear, it will become clear when we actually study this in more detail. But here's the second argument that I can offer you, which is based on the property that we did not prove but observe, which is you take any network flow problem with integer data, there's always an integer optimal solution. So here's a problem in which all the data are integers. So there's an integer optimal solution. Now, if you just have a unit supply and unit demand, and if there's an integer solution, then every flow has to be 0 or 1. So the flow along any arc is either 0 or 1. But you also have a feasible solution to your problem. So there is a way for this unit flow to get from 1 to 6. So figure out the arc along which that 1 unit leads. Okay? So let's say if it leads along, let me continue so you will see. Actually, I didn't put it down. But if you, so let's say that the arc actually goes along, the unit flow goes along the path 1 to 2, 2 to 4, 4 to 6. That would be your shortest path, is what I'm saying. Because if you have an integer solution, then this unit has to take this arc or this arc. It cannot have some of it here and some of it there. So if it takes that arc, well, the 1 unit that is there now has to leave along a single arc. Okay. So maybe it goes here. Well, the 1 unit that's here now has to take a single arc and it has to go here. So you just follow that unit flow wherever it goes, and that's going to give you a shortest path. So this is just notation from your textbook. If you look at a node I, these are all the arcs that leave node I, which is called a forward star. This is the reverse star. This is sort of non-standard notation. But basically, the nice thing is that you can use these to formulate lots of network flow problems. So in general, for instance, you have This is minimizing the overall flow. If xij units flow on rij, you incur a cost of cij times xij. So you like to minimize the overall flow in your problem, subject to these constraints. Okay? Now this is written for the shortest path problem, so let's see. For the source, you have a unit of supply. So which means the stuff that leaves the source minus the stuff that enters the source should equal 1. This is what it means. If you have a unit of supply, then what flows out of the source minus what comes into the source is equal to 1. Or put differently, what flows out of the source equals 1 plus whatever comes into the source, right? That's the extra supply that you have at that node. And you have the opposite for the destination. And for every other node, you have flow conservation, because these nodes don't have supplies or demands, so what flows in has to flow out. So these are called flow conservation constraints. Very common in lots of network flow problems, so we see it very frequently. This just says that the flows are non-negative. So this is a formulation of the shortest path problem as a linear program. If this looks a little unfamiliar or a little tedious, you could think about it as the following. The constraint for node 1 says x12 plus x13 equals 1. The constraint for node 4, so this is for node 1. The constraint for node 4 would say x24 plus x54, which is what enters node 4, equals x46. So this is what enters node 4, and this is what leaves node 4. So this is just physical constraints that come from looking at the problem. Okay, so that more generally is what's written down here in this slide. Okay, so basically, the fact that you have an integer solution means that if you solve the flow problem, you actually get a path. You don't get a bunch of flows, you get a path. So here are applications. That's just a small sample that comes up all over the place. Any questions about this?
Yeah, how does the solution look like? Once you get a solution, you get nodes with a node zero, or?
No, once you get, so your solution would look like, so for instance, so let me spend some time on this. The solution, it turns out for this problem, the top path is the shortest path. So you can see, let me look at it. So 1, 2, 4, 6. So this has length 4, length 2, length 3. This is the shortest path. So your solution to this LP would be x12 equals 1, x24 equals 1, x46 equals 1, and all other xij are 0. This could be one solution to your shortest path problem. Now here's another solution. So let me draw that. So So that's another solution. So you have 1, 2, 2, 5, 5, 4, 4, 6. It has mode hops, but it also has length 9. So that could be another solution to your LC. So x1, 2 is 1, x2, 5 is 1, x5, 4 is 1, x4, 6 is 3. Of course, when you have two solutions, you could take any convex combination of these two, you would get a solution. So for instance, I could take all of these to be I could multiply this whole thing by a third and this whole thing by 2/3, and I would get another solution. So the point is, if you solve the LC, you could get any of these fractional solutions that are all optimal, but there's always one that's integer, and an integer solution will give you a shortest path. So this is how you would get this or this. Maybe there's something else with a length of 9. I don't see it. So I think these are the only two optimal solutions in this particular problem. Does that make sense? So if I average these two, I would get a flow, a feasible flow for the minimum cost flow problem that's not a shortest path solution. But either one of these gives me a shortest path. Other questions? So what time do I have? Oh. Okay, so let's think about let's actually examine this, okay? Let's say that this is the shortest path from node 1 to node 6, okay? Let me even get rid of this. What is the shortest path from 1 to 4? One, 2, 4. Why is that? Yes.
So if there were a shortest one, it would appear in the final solution.
Very good. So this portion of the path, this must be a shortest 1, 4 path. Okay? By that I mean shortest path from 1 to 4. Because otherwise, suppose there were a shorter path from 1 to 4, I could take that and then append this edge to it and get a shorter path from 1 to 6. Okay? Is that clear to everybody? So if I have a shortest path solution for any nodes along that path, you have to have the subpath has to be the shortest for that path. Yes.
Does it also mean that each node on the path can be regarded as the terminal, the final node?
What do you mean by a final node?
Because we want to make a shortest path from the beginning point to the final point, and now we regard number 4 as also one of the final points, so it's also like an optimal.
No, so I think in any graph, so I can give you a graph and I can give you any two nodes and say, find me a shortest path from node X to node T. Okay. Now initially I gave you nodes 1 and 6, but the point I'm trying to make is if you solve this problem, you also solve a bunch of other problems that you weren't asked to solve originally. And one of those would be, suppose I ask you now for the shortest path from 1 to 4, you don't have to do any extra computation because this has to be a shortest path from 1 to 4. There could be other paths from 1 to 4 with the same distance as we just saw, right? So this is another. So 1, 2, 5, 4 would be another shortest path from 1 to 4, but the distance has to be the same. So certainly this path is a shortest 1, 4 path. And the argument is if there were a path that's actually shorter, then you could take that one, combine it with this edge to get a better path from 1 to 6 than what you found. Because what you found was the best possible, such a shorter path cannot exist. Okay? This, so if you understand it, please remember it, because this is the principle behind dynamic programming. Okay? So we are going to come back to this observation and in the last topic for the course. It's actually fair to say that this is DP. The dynamic programming is essentially this observation applied in very ingenious ways. It's essentially this. But somehow you can solve problems by solving sub-problems and combining their solutions in a meaningful way. Okay. So I've also found shortest path from 1 to 4, 1 to 2, 1 to 5. So the only other path that I need to find is from 1 to 3. It seems like there's only one way to get from 1 to 3. Right? And because there are two shortest paths from 1 to 4, I can omit any one of them. So in this case, let me omit this. So this entity is what's called the shortest path tree. So this gives you the shortest path from node 1 to every other node. It's a tree because there are no cycles, and you can argue that there can never be, you can always get a tree, right? Because a cycle indicates that there are two ways of getting from nodes of the cycle to other nodes of the cycle. You can get rid of some edge. This is not. So when you solve the shortest path problem, it turns out that you actually solve something more general. And when we discuss specialized algorithms for shortest paths, they will in fact do something like this. Okay? So the point is, suppose instead of asking you to find the shortest path from 1 to 6, suppose I ask you to find shortest path from 1 to every other node. How would you model this problem as a flow problem? So before, we wanted to find the shortest path from 1 to 6. So we said this has a supply of 1 and this has a demand of 1. Now I want to find the shortest path from 1 to 2, 1 to 3, 1 to 4, 1 to 5, 1 to 6. So how many units of supply should I use here? 5. And what should the demand be? -1, so there's a unit demand at every other node. Okay? So that is going to solve the problem of finding the shortest path from a node S to every other node. Okay? And the arguments are exactly the same. If an integer amount leaves, if the flows are all integer, well, the flow along this arc has to be integer. Flow along this arc has to be integer, and only one unit will get, one unit will get absorbed at every node. So the remaining flow has to be integer, and so on. So to recover this solution, you would in fact send, I guess, 3 units of flow here. Sorry, 4 units of. So this flow will be 4. So this is the flow. Okay. This flow will be 1. Okay. Out of the 4 units, 1 will get absorbed, and you will send 2 units of flow here and 1 unit of flow here. So you see flow conservation at this node. 4 units come in, 2 are forwarded along this arc, 1 is forwarded along this arc, and 1 is consumed. The 2 units here, 1 is going to be consumed, and 1 unit will be sent along this arc, and so on. So this is what's called the single source shortest path problem. The shortest path problem from source to every other destination. Okay? So this is the shortest path tree problem. So there's your, so S has a supply of n-1, every other node has a demand of 1. So the flow conservation constraints have to be modified to account for this. So I did do the right thing. Okay, so that's the shortest path tree. And here's an application where there's an application to reliability. So you have a communication network in which links fail. So the fact that a link is successfully operating, that probability is Pij. If they fail independently, and you want to know whether you have a path from I to J, well, you want to look at the most reliable path. The most reliable path would be one for which this product is maximized. And you can solve that as a shortest path problem, and this is discussed in your textbooks. It's also here, so you can look it up. So here's yet another application, which is the NASPAC problem. Again, this is not really a network problem as stated, but it can be converted to a network problem. So here's the problem. You have n items. Items have a value, and they have a size. Okay? So it has a weight of Wi and a value of Ui, and you can carry a limited amount of weight. So you'd like to select items that you'd like to take along. So first of all, it has to fit your weight budget. So the stuff that you can carry cannot be more than W. But among all possible subsets whose total weight is at most W, you want to find one that's most valuable. Okay? So here's a typical problem, and there is a way to convert this problem into a shortest path problem. In fact, the shortest path problem is a prototypical dynamic programming problem. So there are many, many other problems. And pretty much any problem for which dynamic programming is applicable can be converted to a problem of finding a shortest or the longest path in a graph. So we are going to see this in a little bit. Not right now, so I'm just going to skip that over and come to maximum flow, which will be the last problem for today. So here's the same network, except that now these numbers are not distances, they're capacities on arc flows. The goal is to send as much stuff from 1 to 6 as possible. So now they serve a different role. So for instance, from 1, you certainly cannot send more than 10 units, right? So suppose somebody tells you, I know a way of sending 11 units from 1 to 6. You can right away say that it's making something that's completely untrue. But is it possible for you to send 10 units along this network? No? Why? There's a bottleneck where
between node 2 and
Okay, so for instance, let's look at node 3. It is true that you can ship 6 units along, but remember that node 3 can only send out 4 units. Okay? Now, none of these nodes, 2, 3, 4, 5, are interested in consuming any amount of this quantity. They are just points that just forward flows. So 3 cannot forward more than 4 units. Okay? In fact, if you look at, think of nodes 1, 2, 3 as being on one side. The total amount of stuff that can flow out of that subset is just 5. You cannot send more than 5 units across that subset of nodes. Right? So after all, any flow that goes from 1 to 6 has to leave this subset eventually. And the total capacity of that subset is 5. So therefore, you cannot send more than 5 units. Can you send 5 units? Yeah. Yes? So, what did you just prove? So the maximum flow on this network is 5. Right? So we had a visual proof of that fact. So it turns out that the maximum flow problem is a primal linear programming problem. The other problem that the argument that we just used, that you cannot send more than 5 units, that is, it turns out, the dual of that linear program. So the argument that we just used is actually a primal dual argument. We said, you look at any such cut, the flow across that cut, so the capacity of that cut is an upper bound on the amount of flow that you can send. Just as any feasible solution to the dual problem was an upper bound on the best possible solution to the primal problem. And you look at what's called a minimum capacity cut, and that has to be, the maximum amount of flow should be at most a min capacity cut. And it turns out that they are actually equal. The maximum flow equals the minimum cut. This theorem can be proved by appealing to linear programming duality. You take this problem, formulate it as a linear program, find its dual, and that turns out to be max flow equals min cut is really can be proved using linear programming duality for this pair of primal and dual problems. Okay? So here's the maximum flow, and here's a solution. Here's a solution that gets you those 5 units. As you can imagine, the cut that we identified has to be saturated, right? Every arc across that cut has to carry flow up to capacity. Because if any of these had flow less than capacity, you wouldn't get a maximum flow. So what is this? What is this cut? The cut is a partition of the nodes such that the origin node is on one side and the destination node is on the other side. So this is so the first cut that's written here, node 1 is by itself and the other nodes are all together, represents the first cut that we identified, right? That said, this cut has a capacity of 10. So if you look at this cut, it's seems like you could send, this stuff says you can send at most 10 units. But you can look at other subsets, and those are all listed here. And of course, you could pick the minimum cut. The minimum cut is going to give you still a bound on the maximum flow that is achievable. Okay? And the max flow min cut theorem just says that the value of the maximum flow is equal to the value of the minimum cut. This is a prototypical min-max result. And as I said, it can be proved using LT duality, but there are other nicer proofs of it, one of which we see. So, of course, you can formulate the maximum flow problem as an LP, and I'll discuss this formulation in just now. Okay? So, you want to maximize so this set of constraints here just say that there's flow conservation everywhere. This formulation is interesting because it makes use of the following idea. So I take this original network and I introduce an arc from T to S. The idea is that I am going to, whatever flow goes from S to T, I'm going to send back along this arc. If 100 units are shipped from S to T, this arc will have a flow of 100. So that the flow is conserved at every node. So before, node S wouldn't conserve flow, node T wouldn't conserve flow, every other node would conserve flow, but now I'm going to send back this stuff so that all the nodes conserve flow. Now, of course, so once you have a network like this, where there are no supplies, no demands, only capacities, you can just send the zero flow, right? Don't send anything anywhere. That's a feasible solution. That conserves flow at every node. So what is the incentive for you to send flow from T to S? Well, I'm going to have to pay you money to send flow from T to S. So any unit of flow that you send along this arc, I'm going to give you $1. Okay. Now what would you do? You don't get any money from sending flow from along the arc of the original network, but you get $1 for every flow that you send from T to S. So what would you do? You want to maximize the flow along this arc. But if you maximize the flow along this arc, what are you in effect doing? You're maximizing the stuff that flows from S to T. Because so if this arc carries a flow of 100, 100 units have to leave S, and 100 units have to reach T. And flow has to be conserved everywhere else. So maximizing the flow along this arc is the same as maximizing the flow from S to T. Okay? Once you make that observation, you have this formulation. Okay? That you have flow conserved everywhere, you maximize the flow along the arc XDS, and you obey capacity constraints. Okay? So basically, we've looked at various special cases and figured out how to formulate them as linear programs. We've also seen some properties of this set of linear programs and of certain problems that we just solved. So what we'll do is, on Tuesday, of course, you have the exam. On Thursday, we are going to, so this is basically chapter 5 of your textbook. On Thursday, we are going to start with some of these special models and try to understand them better. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, for one thing, we'll construct special algorithms for solving certain problems. And the other thing that we'll do is specialize simplex methods to these kinds of problems. Both of these are the subject of chapter 6 of your textbook. And once we are done with that, we'll be done with length of flow. Yes? No. So I'll see you at 9 Tuesday. Thank you for your time and good luck in the session.